Have you ever felt a bit lost during the dark times of life's challenges? I know I have. I'm so grateful for those friends, loved ones, and even strangers that have provided me a pebble of light in the form of understanding and support. They've blessed my life, sometimes even more than they know. Seeing a little bright spot on the path has helped me to move forward when things are difficult. This show is here to celebrate those who add light to our lives. We'll share some of their stories as well as ways in which to light the paths of others. Please come find me on Instagram and Facebook at Pebbles of Light, as well as at ammaxon.com. I love having the opportunity to interact with you and hear about those who've added a pebble of light to your path. Enjoy the show. Hello, welcome to episode 27 of Pebbles of Light. Thank you for being here. I've got a fantastic episode for you with some of my most influential people. Before we jump in, I want to share a quick word from this episode's sponsor. This week's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. I've always been a strong proponent of counseling services. Even in my professional career as a pharmacist, I've felt that the effects of any medication to help with anxiety or depression can only improve when it's paired with participation in counseling. But I get it. Sometimes there are barriers to being able to go to a counselor, whether that's finding time or figuring out the cost. BetterHelp strives to make counseling affordable, accessible, and convenient. They will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. If after meeting with your therapist you don't feel it's a good fit, it is easy and free to change. They even offer financial aid if needed, and I have a very special offer for Pebbles of Light listeners. Get 10% off your first month when you go to betterhelp.com/pebbles. That's BetterHelp, HELP/pebbles. And now, back to the show. The last episode was an interview with Darla Trendler from the Spiritually Minded Women podcast, where we discussed how to help ourselves and others, especially the youth in our lives, to recognize their divine potential. If you haven't had a chance to listen, be sure to check it out. For those that are new here, every episode has a pebble, which is just a little call to action in relation to that episode. And the pebble for Darla's episode was to share an encouraging, sincere compliment with a teen or anyone. Do your best to brighten someone else's day with the power of your words. I hope you've had the opportunity to do that. Especially with all that's going on these days, every little bit of kindness helps. Now on to this episode. In the very first episode, I shared about 3 people that had placed pebbles of light in my path. And if I was doing a top 5, this episode's guests would definitely be near the top. Today, I feature a conversation with Drake Self and Lars Peterson. In the episode, we share a lot about how our friendship came to be and how it changed our lives. But as a brief introduction, Lars and I met at Bible camp when we were about 11 years old. Years later, Lars met Drake while working at the 2002 Olympics, and later, I was introduced to Drake through Lars. Lars's name may sound a little bit familiar because his mom, Myrna, is featured in episode 23, where she shares her amazing story. When Lars was a teenager, Myrna was in a car accident that resulted in her being a quadriplegic. In the episode, she shares her story of finding new meaning in life after the accident and also being an advocate for others that are differently abled. She is such an inspiration, so be sure to check out episode 23 for more of her story. The world has gotten even a little bit more chaotic over the last few weeks, and I'm grateful for the chance I had to sit down with these 2 wonderful friends. As we talked, I was repeatedly reminded of the eternal nature of friendship. Focusing on that eternal perspective is always helpful during trials and upheavals. So I hope you're able to recognize the eternal friendships that you have in your life as you listen to us share our story. All right, I am so grateful for this chance today to talk with Drake Self and Lars Peterson. These 2 men have had such an influence on my life, and I'm grateful to hear a little bit of their backstory and how their friendship started. It all started with the 2002 Winter Olympics, which tonight, actually, the Olympics are on TV. I kind of wish that we were all just kind of sitting around a TV watching the Olympics and chatting between the long commercial breaks, but we're over on Zoom, and so we'll just kind of go through a little backstory on everybody. Lars, do you want to talk a little bit just kind of about where you're at now and what led you to the 2002 Winter Olympics?
I can't believe it's been 20 years already. There's so much about it that I remember like it was yesterday, and especially meeting Drake, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, I'm sure. But at the moment, I actually just moved back out to Utah from Minnesota. Took a job working for the church. I work with the missionary travel visa team. We work with the documents that missionaries submit and try to get them approved for visas to head abroad. That's been a real neat experience, and just started that about 4 months ago.
So you started when it was really complicated to get visas.
They were just starting to head out again after the kind of the peak of COVID, and they're still transitioning from that, but still very interesting times in missionary travel. When we give them tentative timelines for departure dates, there's always a caveat that things can change overnight. So interesting times, but it's amazing to see how the Lord has got a hand in everything and placing them where they need to be, whether it's domestically or abroad. It's been fun to communicate with the missionaries and their families throughout the process. And yeah, really rewarding experience, and especially fun to be back out here.
Nice. And Drake, how about a little backstory on you?
I one of the highlights of my life is meeting Lars Peterson and Ann Granzabach. When I first met Lars, I was a volunteer and I was assigned to the luge event to just help. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. And Lars ended up being my boss on the track just to keep it clean and sweep it and keep it clean in between each slider. And two of my best friends that I grew up with, their business sponsored some luge events, and they invited me along, and I ended up on the luge. In looking up to Lars was the expert of keeping the track clean. That was fun. Before the 2002 Olympics in February, we got to go out. It seemed like it was October or November. There was a training session for a few days. And I ended up in Lars's group, and I think there were 10 or 12 groups up and down the track. That's how I got to meet Lars. He was my boss, and I could easily tell, you got to know people up and down the track, lots of breaks, and you'd mingle around. And it seemed like most of the conversations and talk with the kind of seemed like maybe really transient people. It was how much they drank last night, or how late they stayed up, or just some of the crazy adventures they did that weren't so uplifting. But Lars just stuck out like a bright light of, this guy is honorable. This guy's got morals and a good direction in life. He finished college. He was just head and shoulders above everyone else that I got to know there. And I thought, wow, I want to get to know this guy. He's exceptional. So that's how I met Lars.
So I've known Lars since we were, I think, 11 was when we first met at camp. I interviewed his mom for the podcast. She's on episode 23. And I think his amazingness is attributed to his mom. Lars, do you want to talk a little bit about your mom's experience and how that's kind of shaped you into the person that you are?
Well, first off, that is very, very humbling to hear, Drake. I could point every one of those compliments back at you, and it's thank you for that. And any qualities that I might have, I certainly could attribute to an influence from an incredible mother. And I don't know if there's enough hours in the day to describe the influence that she's been on myself and my three younger sisters, our whole family. But the first thing I think of is her influence on our faith and on keeping God and Jesus Christ center of our lives. She just instilled a lot of work ethic and persistence, even stubborn persistence, if we felt something was worth the cause. And my mom was a single mother much of growing up, and elementary school teacher, so she just did what she could to get us all by. I don't remember ever feeling like we lacked much of anything. She was really active in the community and active in our church and active in our sports and any activity we were involved with. Just, I don't know how she got to so many places and was present for so many things. And amidst all that, someone who was incredibly charitable and kind and energetic and just loving, especially people that were tough to love sometimes. And those were a lot of times her favorite people to get to know. Unfortunately, when I was 16, I was in a car accident, a very serious one, and rendered her, for the most part, a quadriplegic. requiring 24-hour care since that time. And so we did what we could to have her back at home with us, my sisters and I, by caring for her in the ways that we could when we were home. And I had some wonderful health care there, especially during the school day. But ultimately, just kind of trying to survive as a family to begin with 4 young kids and a single mom, and then now a disabled mother. I consider it through the grace of God that we made it through our teenage years and came up the other side and still have plenty to smile about. And fortunately, after some rocky years there, my mom's mental, emotional, and spiritual state of being is back to how we remembered it, if not even more impressive now. She's back involved in the community and just a pillar of engagement and optimism and enthusiasm and faith around town, where she lives in Grand Rapids now. And, I wouldn't change a thing in hindsight.
She's such an advocate for people who may not usually be seen or recognized. She does such a great job. So Lars, when you went to Utah, it was somewhat unexpected, right? Like, can you kind of look back and see kind of this little divine fingerprint that brought you from Minnesota to Salt Lake to ending up in the same group as Drake?
Looking back, it's pretty evident to me anyways that the Lord had a hand in directing my path a little bit. I had a friend actually from college. His name was Matt, and he was working out in Montana. And I thought that would be kind of a fun experience. He was working at a guest ranch out there. And I just got in touch with him and said, hey, how is it out there? I've been thinking about trying something different and moving out of Minnesota and having a new experience. And thought Montana would be a fun place to land for a while. And he said, well, it's great. But if you're not too partial, I'm heading out to Utah to work for the Olympics. They're hiring at the Olympic Park in Park City. And I think they're still taking applications for the track crew, which is what he was hired to do. And basically we're human Zambonis taking care of the ice on the track. They were hiring for that anyways. I thought, well, shoot, I could maybe make a case for being able to do that. So I called out there. I said, yeah, that sounds about as fun as anything, be out there for the Olympics. And so I called the Olympic Park, and sure enough, they were hiring and they were willing to interview me over the phone. And I guess they figured being from Minnesota, I could probably handle being outside in the snow and on the ice. And he said, well, just get yourself a pair of boots and come on out. And so that was a good enough reason for me. And I found myself out in Utah and had never been to Utah. I didn't know much about it. And, I was at a very searching point in my life spiritually. And, so around the same time, I was really wanting to be a part of a congregation and establish a church community in Utah. And so but I wasn't necessarily set on my Lutheran faith, which I grew up in, certainly loved, but was curious what else was out there. And so I remember popping into a Baptist service one time in Heber. There's a chapel there, and went to mass with my friend Matt, who's Catholic, and actually found a Lutheran church in Park City, Shepherd of the Mountain Lutheran Church, and went there. And the guy I graduated with was a youth director there. I didn't even know he had moved out to Utah. And so I thought that was kind of fun, and actually helped him a little bit with one of his youth nights, and thought to myself, this is about as good a place as any for me to be, just kind of stick with my Lutheran heritage, And right around that same time, I'd met a girl in Heber City. Megan was her name, and we got to be friends and had dinner one night. And she was curious about my Lutheran background, and I told her a little bit about our beliefs, and especially, our belief in the Bible and in Christ. And I knew she was LDS. She had mentioned that, and she had commented after I said that, oh, we believe that too. And I was surprised. I didn't know much about at that time more commonly known as the Mormon Church, but I was surprised to hear that there was a faith in Christ, and the Bible was recognized scripture as well. And so I was kind of curious what the big deal was. I had heard many rumors and learned after the fact many misconceptions about the church. So I was surprised to hear that there was at least those two very large things in common with the faith I grew up in. And I asked her, what was the big deal about this, LDS church, and what set it apart? And I remember even the hand gesture she made, but she said with such confidence, and bore her testimony right there. She said, well, we believe it to be the true church of Jesus Christ. And I just had never had a phrase impact me as much as it did at that time. And so in my mind and the searching that was going on in my heart at that time, I fortunately was very open to the idea. I thought it sounded too good to be true, but she invited me to church and went to a singles ward there in Midway, Utah, and missionaries approached and introduced themselves. I asked if I wanted to learn more. I said, yeah. And things happened pretty quickly from there and started the next chapter of what would be one of the more memorable periods of my life.
It's interesting that you were searching because at the same time, I was in Chicago, obviously about the same age, grew up also in the Lutheran church. And I was kind of doing the same thing. I was in a graduate school program, so I go to different churches with different friends and try different things. I reached out to you. I don't even remember why. Again, it must be part of that divine fingerprint, right? And I was just like, hey, what are you up to? Where'd you go after graduation? Because I was kind of at a crossroads too. I was in a graduate school program and I wasn't really happy with it and wasn't sure what I should do. And I'd actually said a prayer that I would be able to be an instrument in the hands of God and that I would be able to find the path that he would have me take. And at that point, I didn't pray a lot. Like I didn't kneel down and pray, but I did for that one. And within a few days of doing that, for some reason, I decided I needed to email you. I guess we know what that reason is. We talked a little bit and then I talked to your mom and your mom had said that you'd been looking at kind of some different churches, but you had said to me, I've been going to this other church out here and it's really great. It's a lot like the church we grew up in, but it just adds a little bit more to the story. And I think you'll appreciate the focus there is on family. And so then I was like, it was kind of half like I'm interested in what this church is all about. And then half of what's he getting himself into? I had no idea. But that was what kind of started my searching. And it's actually yesterday was exactly 20 years since I first read the Book of Mormon because I found it in my hotel on February 6th when I was staying in Rochester. I found a Book of Mormon in my Marriott hotel nightstand. So that was exactly 20 years ago.
Wow.
Yesterday. But it's just interesting thinking about seeing how the dominoes fall and how those different connections. I've had the opportunity in church recently to talk a lot about the ideas of love, share, and invite in order to help people learn more about the church and do it in a normal and natural way. And I used your example to me often, saying it was a normal and natural way to say, hey, I'm going to this other church. You should check it out. And that has made that simple, small invitation has made such a huge difference in my life. Just, hey, you should check it out. And I think there's a lot to that idea, and especially the idea of harnessing the youth of the church and focusing on the youth of the church, because like us, we were in our early 20s at that time. Like that's at that stage of life where you're just kind of trying to find your way and figure out what God's plan is for you.
It really is amazing how the Lord can consecrate our experiences or conversations or what we say or what someone says to us to make an impact that maybe at first neither party realizes how significant it's going to be. I couldn't have known that a conversation that I had with my friend Megan would have resulted in what it did. And likewise, just simple conversation with you and how impactful that's been for both of us. And as much, through your example as anything as well, and where you've taken your faith and how that's impacted others.
So Drake, I feel like I remember you saying at some point, you kind of had in the back of your mind that you're like, oh, this Lars kid, I want to introduce him to the church. And you went and you approached him about it. And he said, oh, I was just baptized. What was that experience like for you?
When we left our training in November, waiting for the February Olympics to start, I came home with this story telling my wife, you've got to meet this Lars. I got a new friend named Lars there. He's just remarkable. And with the idea that there's a reason that the Olympics came to Salt Lake, the attention of the world came there, kind of open up this goodness, this light that we could spread through the world. But, and with that same thing, with the prayer in my heart, how can I be an instrument in the hand of the Lord, or how can I be helpful? How can I maximize this opportunity that there is for the world to get to know us and shed some light on this. And I was just so anxious to get back to the track for the Olympics. And then, and the very first day we were there, I made sure I found Lars, made sure I got assigned to his team. And our first break that we had between sliders, I walked up to him. I said, "Here we go." I go, "So Lars, are you a Lutheran?" Because I knew he had Scandinavian background, same as my family. And I, "So you, Lars, so you're a Lutheran? Ready to hopefully start a conversation that might go somewhere?" And he just had the biggest smile. And he goes, "Funny you would ask that. I was just baptized. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints now." And wow, I had the biggest smile, and my heart was filled up, and it was the best feeling. I just felt so happy and joyful. So that's when I found out. I thought, yeah, there's a reason he's here. He's got a lot of good to do in this world.
That's for certain.
That was a fun memory. I remember the conversation.
Yeah.
So Lars, did you know that by saying that you were just going to make his day?
Well, I was just really happy to be able to share that with him, because I could sense just a real genuine interest in getting to know one another, and him sharing what obviously was very near and dear to him. And it was just really, really fun to be able to share that, I had the same enthusiasm about the faith that I now shared with him. So it was cool. It was just kind of a surreal scenario.
It was fun. Not only my wife, we talked about Lars, but my kids knew about Lars. My mom knew about Lars. My sisters knew about Lars before I even had that chance to talk to him at the Olympics. I had a lot of anticipation there. This is the right moment. There's not a better opportunity than this. Here we go.
At this point, I had been meeting with missionaries for a little bit, and they'd asked me if I wanted to get baptized. And I thought, okay, well, can my friend who introduced me to the church, can my friend do it? And they were like, oh, yeah, that'd be awesome. And so then we were trying to figure it out, because Lars was in Utah. I was in Chicago, but I was moving to Rochester, New York. But I was also going home to Minnesota at some point. So we were trying to figure that all out. And then Drake stepped into the picture and said, hey, I can get tickets for General Conference. And so Lars had called me and said, my friend can get tickets for General Conference if you would be okay getting baptized here in Utah. And that was back when I was young, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go on a trip. And so I flew out there. But I remember it was very funny. I'd asked Lars, I was like, what's General Conference? Correct me if I'm wrong. You were like, I don't know, but it's a big deal. And I was like, okay.
Very well. I very well could have done what I said.
And so then I flew out to Utah, and then I got to meet Drake as well. And so when you're baptized as a member of the church, afterwards you're confirmed by laying on of hands and given the gift of the Holy Ghost. And Drake was the person who performed that ordinance for me. And I just remember that being such a neat experience to have the opportunity to meet with you. And I just remember thinking, probably similar to kind of what Lars's thoughts were, was, wow, this guy Drake, like he just, that genuine kindness and that desire to want to help and uplift others and to really act as Christ would act towards others. So that was one of my first impressions of Drake, and his family was just amazing. So I was baptized on Friday, and then Sunday, I think was that the night, Drake, that we had dinner at your mom's house? Would it have been a Sunday night?
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, with my sisters there, and what an impression you two made on my family. You just brought such a light and a happiness, and it was great conversation and just so much love and care. That was a really delightful dinner.
It really was.
And Drake, I remember one of the things that really stood out to me was, and you can share a little bit about this as well, but at the time, it hadn't been that long since your teenage daughter had passed away. And I remember sitting around that table, and you and your wife and your family members were all talking about seeing her again. And as a just recently baptized 2 days ago member of the church, that had such an impression on me because I'd learned obviously about the idea of eternal families and things like that. But that conversation and being able to feel a confirmation of the truth of that doctrine was so strong that night to help me just feel even more solidified in not only the gospel, but the idea of a loving Heavenly Father who wants his children to be happy and his children to be together. Drake, could you talk a little bit, if you're comfortable, about what had happened with Courtney and how your faith helped you overcome the sadness and the difficulties of that time?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I had at that time 3 daughters, and Courtney was our youngest of the 3. She was 15 years old, and she was born with a bad valve in her heart. She'd had a couple of heart surgeries and was doing really well. It would be hard to notice that she had that trouble or that problem, but just friendly and just lively. We were aware when she was born, the doctor told us that she was very, very sick. And from that very first day, Sue and I just looked at each other and said, boy, we've got to make every day really good, really special. It could be her last. And so for 15 years, almost 16, we had that in mind. And we were so filled with the confidence of the plan of happiness that Heavenly Father has for us, knowing that Heavenly Father is a successful parent. He knows how to rescue his children. And my focus just turned from almost this world to an eternal perspective more than it had before. And which gave me a confidence and a courage that if something did happen to her, that I would end up just praying for patience until I could see her again. I had 100% confidence that I would. And that gave me a life of hope, and it filled me up when those dark days and the crazy thoughts and things that come to you, just worry and sadness, and just lifted you up over that. And I'm still the same way today, 20 years later. I just had that confidence and hope and trust in the Savior and Heavenly Father's plan that we will be together, the promises of an eternity together with joy and happiness with our families and friends is the healing part, the comforting part that you need to get past these sad moments. And so with that 15 years with her and with that in mind that she could go home, I knew she was home and she was safe, and I just needed to pray for patience. And I do that today. 20 years later, I have no doubts that we'll be together again. I've had some wonderful dreams and impressions, feelings in the temple, and that come to me as tender mercies that just uplift me and just buoy up that joyfulness and hope. So that's what I live with now. We got a wonderful miracle blessing to have 2 years later. We had twin boys who are now just turned 18 years old, seniors. They're leaving on their missions in about a year and probably late next fall. And I don't know, it's a bonus. I mean, it's a tender mercy, and I'll take it. Courtney's home and she's safe. I don't know God's plan, but he knows it, and I'm okay with it. Whatever it is, come what may. I want to do his will, and I pray for opportunities and chances to be able to spread a little joy and light to anybody I meet each day. And those are good days when you get in good conversations with people and make good friends, and these connections just build you up and bring you happiness each day.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about how your mom had recently passed away and thinking about that reunion of your mom with Courtney and how wonderful that must be for them.
Yeah, I have a picture in my office right here of Courtney with my mom and Sue's mom, who has passed away also, and that's just a hopeful, joyful thing for me.
When you talked about praying for opportunities to share light with others, I couldn't help but think of the amount of generosity that you have shown both Lars and me. For me, it was serving a mission, and for Lars, I'm sure there was more as well. But Lars, I'll let you talk a little bit about how you went from bobsled track, luge track worker to bobsled-er and part of the team, and how that kind of changed in your life. And you can talk about Drake's help and influence there as well.
Well, that was certainly another very unexpected turn in my life, leading to a very unexpected chapter. But through working at the Olympic Park, and I had a sports background, and so was, I guess, naturally curious, at least, about this sport that, I would only see on TV every 4 years during the Olympics or in the movie Cool Runnings. It's about as much as I knew about it, as much as the next person, I guess. But was curious about it. I got talking to some of the athletes and coaches just in passing and just asking about how a person got involved in a sport like that. And was fortunate. I think the supervisor or two, they knew I had some interest there, and there was an opportunity. Steve Holcomb, who went on to be a very successful pilot, the driver for the U.S. team, won a gold medal and multiple golds through his career. While he was still training to compete at that level, he was kind of trying out and training like anybody else. He needed a brakeman to take a run. And so I had the opportunity to jump in and pull brakes for him. So my first 2-man bobsled ride pulling brakes was with Steve Holcomb. He was, a legit athlete at the time, bobsledder. And I think I was even still in my track crew, my work clothes. I might have even had my work boots on, but jumped and sat in the sled just to get it stopped for him when he passed the finish line or the last turn. And so that was really neat. And I was kind of hooked at that point and learned how there was a former national team member who happened to have a copy of a workout program on paper that they used to go through, and said, you can do this on the side if you want to do a little training. And I learned that there's some tryouts. They're kind of like a football combine, similar to that, where they test you on different elements of strength and speed. And so I, just for fun, I guess, was training on the side. There was a couple PE teachers at Park City High School that were gracious enough to let me use their gym at a nice facility there. And so I was training there, and then went to a tryout in the Valley, and was fortunate enough to get invited out to the national team camp out in Lake Placid, New York. And still at this point was thinking, this is just kind of a fun little thing to buy my time with and experiment with. And, had the opportunity to be out there with some other athletes that were recruited, and was fortunate enough to gain the interest of a driver or two, and ended up being able to compete on the America's Cup circuit, just kind of like the minor leagues, I guess you could say, and be a part of the U.S. national team in that capacity at that level, and live out at the training center in Lake Placid. And just, really kind of, it was still kind of surreal, but while at the same time was giving some serious consideration to serving a mission. So I had these sort of competing interests. Obviously if I was going on a mission, then bobsledding had to be set aside. And so I wrestled with that, to be honest with you. And from that gained a testimony of serving a mission in a way that I wouldn't have expected, but I'm certainly grateful for. Shortly after getting into bobsledding and realizing, boy, I could spend a decent amount of time doing this, and it looks like there might be a path there. So I was pretty excited. You'd ask me when I was in elementary school what I wanted to be when I grew up, but a lot of times I'd say professional this or professional that, usually related to sports, basketball, football, whatever. And so it was kind of surreal to be able to compete in some capacity in a sport more or less full time. And although we weren't necessarily paid like pro athletes, there was sponsorship there that allowed us to do it full time. And I was really excited about that, and it was really surreal. But at the same time, I had a real genuine interest in serving a mission as I learned more about it, and certainly got to know so many church members who had served, and those around my age who had already gone. And at that time I was 23, 24 years old. So I had made plans to go. I started filling out papers, and about halfway into the process, had all these opportunities, even more opportunity with bobsledding surface. And certainly my mom's condition was a concern of mine. And it became tough for me to move forward with serving a mission with all the other things going on. And I felt that there was still time to go. I would just kind of wait and see how I felt, and wrestled with it quite a bit, received blessings. And there was an individual in the first singles ward I went to who remains anonymous to this day, but who had offered to fund my mission if I went. And just abundantly grateful for that. But I continued progressing with bobsledding and got to the point where I was fortunate to gain some significant sponsorship, and to where I felt like it's something I could do for the foreseeable future if I wanted to stay in the sport. But the window for serving a mission, and from what I knew about kind of the age limit, was closing. And I struggled with that a lot. And finally was the 2004, 2005 season. So I'd only been in the sport about a year and a half, maybe, or a season and a half. But I found it difficult to devote the kind of time and energy I needed to resources and just what I needed to be competitive in the sport, and still, for me anyways, feel like I was staying balanced on the spiritual side of things and with my faith and with my church activity. And so, long story short, just decided to let go of bobsledding and, quote unquote, retired. And to find out it was maybe just in enough time to still serve a mission. I prayed about it, and one of very few times where I felt a physical sensation when I prayed, made a decision, and got an answer from the Lord. Aside from joining the church, initially, decision to serve a mission, and the answer I got when I made that decision from the Lord was undeniable. And so I began the process again, filling out my papers now over a year later. And bishop and stake president accompanied my papers with a request that an exception be made since I was a convert, but I was 26 at the time. And so it was kind of up in the air. My papers, but we sent my papers in, and I should add that Drake offered to fund my whole mission as well, which I know, Ann, you can attest to and appreciate. But so was just abundantly grateful, and thought, boy, I'm so thankful that I still have a chance to do this, And so I had the experience of filling the papers out, sending them in, anticipating a mission call. And the stake president called me into his office, or one of the stake presidency members called me in and had a letter for me from the church saying that they were thankful for my effort to serve, but that they felt it was in my better interest to move forward with things, and particularly career and family and education. At the same time, I think I did just miss the age cutoff now that I think back on it. But for whatever reason, the window did end up closing, and that was okay. And in hindsight, I guess I have learned just what it does take to serve a mission, not only being on the mission, but the preparation, the willingness, the service, the sacrifice, the testimony of serving a mission that I realize now was still very, very young for me, and maybe didn't develop as quickly as it obviously did for you, Ann. But after the fact, I'm thankful for just the testimony building experience that was. And so at very least, I can live vicariously through those who do serve. And it's kind of ironic that I'm on this side of things working for the church in the missionary travel department and making whatever effort I can to get their visas approved so they can serve abroad. It's just interesting how the Lord works to teach us the lessons that we need, and in the ways that we're willing to allow him to. And so again, I wouldn't change a thing, but the reality is I just needed some testimony strengthening experience, and that was the way that I gained it as far as serving a mission. So maybe when I'm older, I'll have that experience, but in the meantime, can certainly love to support those who decide to make that effort while they're able to.
For me, I was in a graduate school program in upstate New York. And so I'd met Drake and his family when I went out there, and then they happened to be coming out that following summer. So I was baptized in April, and then they came out that following summer to go to the Hill Cumorah pageant. And so we got a lot of great time to just explore upstate New York and spend time together. Drake, I remember you guys were staying at a hotel not too far from my apartment. And I remember going over for breakfast with you and just sitting at breakfast and just talking about things. And so I feel like that was really an opportunity for me to strengthen my relationship with your family. And I'd been going back and forth as soon as I kind of hit that year mark, because you have to be a member of the church for a year before you can submit mission papers. And about the time I hit that year mark, I was kind of like, should I serve a mission? But I'm in this PhD program. And I kept kind of going back and forth. Eventually, I decided that whether or not I was serving a mission, I wasn't in love with the careers that were associated with my PhD program. So therefore, why would I put myself through the grueling years of a PhD program for a career I wouldn't want? So I decided I was going to quit my PhD program anyway, and thought, well, now that I've made that decision, maybe I should think about a mission. And like I said, I was in upstate New York and right near all the church history sites. So I was able to go to the Sacred Grove to pray and ask about whether or not I should serve a mission. And the answer came that I should. And I remember, I let a couple of people know, and I called Drake to let him know and say, hey, I've decided I want to serve a mission. And Drake, we talked about this when I saw you a couple of years ago. I don't even know if you said congratulations or I think you did say, I think you just said congratulations and we're paying for it. That was it was all one thing. And so when we talked about it last time, you talked about how even when you saw the phone ringing, who was calling, you just had this impression of how you should help or to do whatever you could to help. Can you kind of share your side of that story?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I saw that it was you calling, and just it was exciting to hear from you. In fact, I remember driving around. I think we had a rental car just to barely fit us, and then we packed you in there too. Mm-hmm. We were traveling to all these church history sites. You were guiding us. You knew exactly where to go. This was before GPS, I think, but
yeah.
You know exactly where to go. Turn here, turn there, and took us to all the sites. But we were jammed in those little sardines in that little car, and we spent all those days with you, and it was just wonderful. All of us just think you're so remarkable. And so we were just pleased that we have this relationship, this friendship that we built. And when you called, I just, oh, man. And I just was so happy to answer it and see how you're doing and catch up. And I'm sure things are going good. I just kind of had that premonition that if she needs help, we're on it. No question. So it was a blessing. And I tell you, it was a blessing for the whole time you were out there. Just, we had missionary experiences. Our family was blessed. It was a blessing to our family to be able to support you on your mission. And we were so happy and receive your letters and hear how well you were doing. It was just another joyful experience for us, brought by Anne.
Well, I was so grateful for it. I guess I was in a singles branch at the time, and my branch president, he said, so this family that's paying for your mission, their last name is Self. He's like, I'm going to call them the Selfless family instead, because they're just so kind and supportive and helping out. And that was interesting for me, because I guess I don't think I even knew that missionaries paid their own way. I don't know what I was thinking happened, but I was completely blindsided when I went in and I met with my branch president and I told him that I wanted to serve a mission. And he kind of said, how are you going to pay for it? And I was like, well, I can maybe sell my car. I can. And so I'm trying, in my brain, trying to cobble together my finances in order to pay for a mission. And so that was such an unexpected blessing of you saying, we're going to pay for it. And I think you even said, if you go somewhere cold, we'll buy you a coat or something like that. Make sure I wouldn't freeze. I ended up in like Siberia or something.
Yeah. Anything it took, we wanted to help.
So thank you, both of you. The last question on the podcast is always to talk about who has placed pebbles of light in your path. And for me, both of you, obviously, as we've talked, I've been able to share the ways in which you guys have both placed light in my path and helped direct me on the right path and recognize the Lord's hand in my life. So thank you for that. But for each of you, Lars, we'll have you go first. Can you share about one or two people that have placed a pebble of light in your path and helped you see the Lord's hand and direct you in the right way?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Well, likewise, the two of you, I feel like it almost goes without saying, certainly been a unique light in my life since, certainly Drake, since I met you, and Anne, as long as I've known you. I could certainly say the same thing about the two of you, but I would certainly have to include my mom in that. This is someone who obviously has had a very tough go of it through an unfortunate circumstance. And then something that a lot of people don't know about her is that when she was young, her brother, my uncle Leon, he was hit by a pitch in a baseball game and became entirely dependent from then on. Was bedridden for the next 20 years until he passed away. My mom was the second youngest, so she was at home while most of her siblings she was one of 11. Most of them were out of the house by then, or not at home a whole lot. So she cared for him a lot through much of her young years. And so she's seen examples of strength and endurance and faith, and has called on so much of that to endure what she has. And just will always credit any kind of openness that I've had to what the gospel has to offer, credit my mom to that, and her devotion to Jesus Christ. And it's just undeniable, her love for him. And that's paved the way for me to embrace his invitations and his outstretched arms in my life. And also after joining the church, I had the opportunity to receive a patriarchal blessing, and Brother Jim Smedley in Heber City, who's still down there, who I still keep in touch with, he's been a pillar of wisdom to me through the years. I remember after him giving me my blessing, he just said simply, well, stay in touch. And I don't think he had any idea how, for whatever reason, I just knew that I needed to stay in touch with that man. And I did. And we developed a really neat friendship with him and his lovely wife, Betty, and those guys where it doesn't take many words to leave quite an impression when I've asked for his thoughts or advice on things. I'd have to add a third, though, in that same light, my uncle David, who's passed away now, but he was a Lutheran pastor growing up. And he was a tremendous influence on my mom's life, our family's life, and certainly my life as I got older and sought, kind of fatherly advice and wisdom. And I do have to say that my dad, I have so much admiration for him. He was always in the picture, and he always supported my sisters and I with what we needed, even after he and my mom divorced. And seeing her in the hospital, and we lived with him, he did so much for us. And it's more than two people, but
you're good.
That's a tough number to keep it to.
It is. So, Drake, who are some people who have helped light your path?
It kind of gives me tears to think about these people. There's some. I have a grandma, my father's mother, who married Clyde Love. So I have a grandma Love. She raised my dad and his two sisters as a single mom. She included, reached out and loved everybody, anybody that came into her home. She just took care of, and she was just such a perfect example of the perfect grandma. And to have a grandma Love is, it's just, there's so much to feel and be grateful for their wonderful parents. My dad was just a kind gentleman, taught me a lot. He'd have a few words that meant a lot. You'd learn a lot from what he would say. He took me to church. He taught me the priesthood. He ordained me. He taught me to fish. I can look at any time any of my family say that I remind them of my dad. It's such a compliment. I can even look at my back of my hands and say, God, they look like my dad's hands. I just feel so grateful to, in a small part of growing up, to be similar to my father. Wonderful man. He passed away so many years ago, clear 1982. I missed him a long time, but what an influence he has for me. My mom, she taught us so much. She was just a ball of energy, and you can't out accomplish her. She just is busy and such a great example. I must tell you this too, just as my mom was winding down at the end of her days there, I think it was maybe the day before she died, she had kind of wound down enough where she couldn't open her eyes or hold her head up. We'd talk to her and sing to her and just share things with her. And I talked to you, Anne. It was so close to the day that she died, just before that, but you sent me a picture of your grandmother.
Yep.
And talked about her. And I was so excited that next day I was going down to see my mom and spend time with her, and told her that I had talked to you, and I told her about your grandma. And then I said, remember Lars and Anne? They came to dinner here. she opened her eyes and looked up at me while I told her this story about how I met both of you and the kind of the history that we talked a little bit about tonight, and just the experiences that we had. My mother opened her eyes, that, and she hadn't for a couple of days. She opened her eyes and she started to move in her mouth and her lips like she wanted to say something about it. And when I think about you too, it just gives me tears. I feel such a part of, you're a part of my life and my family's life. The experiences that you brought to us and the goodness that you've shared with us and how you've thrived, and your testimonies are deep and strong, and a love for the Savior, and just the remarkable, impressive individuals that you have both turned out to be. It's just, it's you are a part of our family. I feel we're just eternally bonded together. And I'm so grateful that you have brought that joy and light in my life. Both of you, I love you both just deeply, and you've added so much to our family and to our life that you are pebbles of light for me, and I'll be forever eternally grateful to know you both.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about, as we were talking about your mom and my grandma. So I think I texted you about my grandma being, she was hardcore Swedish. I think it was a picture of her wearing a shirt saying persevering old Swede or something like that.
Yes, exactly what it was. Yep.
On her last birthday. And thinking about having your mom, eventually, I guess sooner than we expected at that moment, but your mom being able to be on the other side of the veil and talk to my grandma. So thinking about it from that perspective, and then everything else that you've said, I can't help but think that we all were friends before we came to this earth, and we made promises to help each other and support each other.
Yeah, I agree.
And that there was some divine purpose in that. And
yeah. And let me just add one more thing that I think might help people picture maybe this, is that when you called me to tell me about your desire to serve a mission, your explanation was, and this is your pure heart. Your explanation to me was, I figured that the Lord has plenty of smart people. He needs more good people. I mean, that explained how your balance between your schooling at that time and your desire to serve the Lord, to do your part. You have a pure heart to help and love and reach out and stand as a witness for the Savior in every place. I think that explains a lot. That one simple sentence that I've taught to primary kids, to scouts, to priests and teachers and deacons quorums and the young women. The Lord has plenty of smart people. He needs more good people. And you're carrying the banner for that, both of you. I'm just so blessed to know you both.
Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. It's been so great to just reconnect, and it's been really insightful to hear kind of the different sides of the stories and see how all the puzzle pieces really, really fit together.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
There's so many great insights in that interview. One of my favorites was when Drake said, "I don't know God's plan, but he knows it. And I'm okay with it, whatever it is." A lot has been going on, and we really don't know God's plan, but we can have faith that he knows it and that he loves us and will do whatever it is that he needs to do to help us become the people that he knows we can be. It was so wonderful to get back in touch with Drake and Lars and reflect on the circumstances that led to our friendships. I've shared this quote from C.S. Lewis on a previous episode, but I won't share it here again because it just fits so well. It says, quote, "In friendship, we think we have chosen our peers. In reality, a few years difference in the dates of our births, a few more miles between certain houses, the choice of one university instead of another, the accident of a topic being raised or not raised at a first meeting, any of these chances might have kept us apart. But for a Christian, there are strictly speaking no chances. A secret master of ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to the disciples, 'Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you,' can truly say to every group of Christian friends, 'Ye have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another.' Friendship is not a reward for discriminating and good taste in finding one another out. It is the instrument by which God reveals to each of us the beauties of others." End quote. The pebble for this week is to get in touch, whether in person, a phone call, a text, just something, with someone who has been a pebble of light in your life. Again, if you're wanting to learn more about Lars's mom's amazing story, check out episode 23. I'll link it in the show notes, so be sure to check the full show notes for that, as well as that quote from C.S. Lewis. I'll put that there too. On our next episode is an interview with Beverly Holloway. Beverly is a casting director and has worked on a number of faith-based films and TV shows, including The Ultimate Gift, I Can Only Imagine, I Still Believe, and The Chosen. She shares many wonderful insights, and I love hearing how she came to do what she does. Until then, keep looking for the bright spots on your path, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in today. More than what has been said, I hope that you've been able to listen to your thoughts and feelings. Maybe you've thought of someone who has brought light to your path. Let them know of your gratitude. Maybe you've been inspired as to how to add some light to your own path or the path of another. Do your best to act on those feelings and impressions. I would love to learn more about you and your experiences. Please come find me on Instagram and Facebook at Pebbles of Light. If you like what you hear, please review so we can spread this light further. You can find show notes and more resources at ammaxon.com. Until next time.